Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets have a bad weekend following the Thanksgiving holiday, double losses to the Orlando Magic, and injuries to boot. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms and let you know that you can start every single season with big returns on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And Doug, where we get started, is talking about the Brooklyn Nets, and yours truly saying, let's just enjoy it. Let these wins flow, baby. Don't have no regrets. And then they give you back-to-back losses. The Friday night one, obviously coming in the NBA Cup, where they were already eliminated. Something that Jordi Fernandez fought some of the media on leading into that game as well.
Yeah, look, we said like we're going to be okay with the wins. Losses are okay too, right? So we're thinking about Cooper Flagg and the Ace Baileys of the world, like taking some L's during this time of the year isn't the worst thing either. So I think like there's a world where the Nets fans I think can like sort of have their cake and eat it too, where it's it's not amazing to watch these just get swept over the weekend, to not have it be like crazy competitive. I mean, not at all competitive in the first game, and then kind of sort of like around the margins of competitive in the second one. But you walk away from it and you think, okay, in the end, they continue to fight hard. The trade value on some of these guys continues to stay pretty high. I think there are some injury concerns, but if we're looking at it like sort of holistically at the whole season, then taking losses like this just isn't the worst thing in the whole world, which is something, it's weird. Again, it's a weird fan experience, but going 0-2 over the weekend, this does feel a little bit more like what the Nets probably have to offer as the season goes on, especially as trades happen, injuries happen. Like they're just fighting hard only takes you so far in the NBA. Unfortunately, they've already come way further than most people thought they would. But this weekend I thought was a good sort of window into maybe what the real world expectation is going forward for this team on a night-to-night basis.
And you mentioned that 123-100 loss, the more seismic of the two on Friday night against Orlando versus what was just kind of a, visually, I wouldn't say pleasure cruise, 100-92 yesterday. So it's a bad weekend overall. And also, I think maybe one of the things that we haven't talked about as much when we've discussed some of the fun wins early in the season and just kind of enjoying it and knowing that the losses are going to come for Brooklyn is that these other teams that have more expectations, have higher expectations, are also going to tweak and adjust and start to hit their stride as you work into the middle part of this year. So when you get into 20 plus games, even though Orlando has their own injuries to deal with and every team does, I agree with you that it just seems like we're going to get reminded of why it was a 17.5 over under win total, right? Of why, even when you surprise some teams, there's still going to be games like we had over the weekend where you say, yeah. And also, if the Nets suffer some key injuries, which we've talked about, it's going to make it really hard to win basketball games. And even worse than that is that there's going to be some of those games where when you have some injuries, it's actually going to look brutal. And that's the thing that we were concerned about that got kind of hedged off here a little bit. Dennis Schroder sometimes down, Cam Thomas sometimes down. The Nets were finding ways to win a couple games. I think they still will. But then you got samples where you're like, right, this is what we thought would happen if any key contributors were not on the court.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the Friday night game was a perfect example of this, where Schroeder's out, Cam Thomas is out, and you just knew it right away. It's like, how is this team going to score? And I mean, they got 100 up somehow against a good defensive Orlando Magic team. But when you run out a starting lineup of Ben Simmons, Tyrese Martin, Cam Johnson, Ziaire, and Jalen Wilson, like the expectations are low about how much you're going to be able to score. Called that before the game even started. I said, well, this is where the rubber meets the scoring road here. They don't have the two guys that can really facilitate offense in terms of Schroeder and Cam. And at that point, it's like, okay, you get 34 of the greatest minutes Shake Milton's ever played, and they still get, just to 100, just to 100 minutes, or sorry, just to 100 points. And is it not at all surprising that that's a tanking lineup, that lineup the starting lineup that I mentioned before. Again, when you're running Tyrese Martin out there, as much as like he looked like Steph Curry the game before, I mean, we kept to temper our expectations some. The scoring outputs for that starting five on like kind of real minutes, everyone was pushing 25 plus except for Ziaire. Tyrese 8, Simmons 4, Cam Johnson 14, Ziaire 5, Jalen Wilson 11. That's the starting lineup, right? They're just not going to be able to score. They're just not going to be able to score without some of these guards in the game. Like, they just need those two guys. And that, we've been wrong about a lot of stuff this year, just mostly in terms of like how many games the team was going to win. Where we have not really been wrong is this assessment, which was they can't afford to lose those two guys. Like, if those two guys don't play, they just have a totally impossible time scoring outside of just complete heat check moments from guys who are very fringe NBA players. And I think that's going to be kind of the theme going forward.
And it's been funny, too, because even that Friday night game, you mentioned also about it being kind of a tank lineup, and you still get good performances from Trendon Watford in 20 minutes and 6 of 11 and 13 points, 22 from Milton, as you mentioned, 16 from Keon Johnson. Like, and it's two parts, really, because those guys play some big minutes. So you get some nice performances. So individually, you can still take away something good from that game on Friday night in spite of the loss. But even with those big performances, it's still a 23-point loss, right? You're still struggling to find offense, and you're struggling to find consistency. The only nod here before we talk about injuries, which will include Ben Simmons, I keep trying to give caveats of we're not trying to drag the guy, but also he ends up getting injured on Sunday. We're going to talk about that. In this game, when you don't have anybody else, and maybe it's the opportunity for a guy like Ben Simmons to say, well, I'm the veteran player here. And really, when you look around that roster outside of Cameron Johnson, it's like, I am the vet. I should be the leader. 26 minutes, 2 shots go up in that game, has 8 assists. Like, the assists are always there, but it continues to be that seesaw for him. So if we're just talking about a couple of the other little footnotes here, some guys are coming on. Trendon Watford continue to play pretty well, but Ben Simmons continues to be the seesaw good game. And then the next game, you can't figure out where he's coming from or what he's going to do or often not do on the court. And again, it's not to drag him, but it does become more emphasized when you have some of these other players around him on the court, and the offensive game is actually the thing you really need him to dial up more than facilitating for others or even some of the defensive value that he brings.
Yeah, this is just part of the thing. We haven't really been overly bullish on him. They've been slightly better with him on the court this season than with him off. It's been negatives for both. Now, look, like, they have a negative point differential in the season, so like there's aren't many guys who they've had positive point differentials on this season. I think is like Schroder the only one who's played real minutes. I should look at this real fast. And he's barely there too. Like, he's like, they're basically just like net neutral and then really pretty bad with him off. But like, so it's not really his fault. Like, this is just like sort of where the expectation is going into this season. And again, like, if the goal is to just lose games basically while being competitive, fine. Like, these are fine lineups thrown out there. They still play really hard. The effort's always there. I want to talk about Jordi Fernandez here in a second too, because like the effort around just like what they're doing on a game-to-game basis, especially where he's like just now willing to fight other players, all for it. Like, when it comes to just like the vim and vigor, but overall, yeah, like, you just can't really be all that surprised at this. And again, it's not even the worst thing in the world. Like, it's just not even just running these lineups out there is just not a bad thing. You get a window into what some of these guys can do. Everyone still plays really hard, so like the product is not just this roll over and die kind of theme like we've seen from some other teams, because like there's some other teams out there that are just completely brutal. But so anyway, I think that just overall this is kind of where we stand. I want to talk a little bit more about Jordy. I want to talk a little bit more about what happened in these 2 Magic games, some trade chatter, some injury stuff. Got a lot on tap. We'll get to that all here in just one moment. Want to let you know this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, we got the holidays around the corner. You want to stay happy. You want to stay a little cozy at home during December. What helps you stay cozy during those winter months? Maybe it's wrapping up in a blanket. I know this is where my kids love to go. Watching a movie, just making sure you're kind of warm and feeling good. Therapy is a great way to bring yourself some comfort that never goes away, even when the season changes. Like, look, BetterHelp has figured this out for you. They're going to be able to match you up with a licensed therapist. You're going to get some of those things off your chest, be able to feel comfortable with yourself and with the world around you. That's what we all kind of need. Really need it all year long, not just headed into the holidays, for the holidays and beyond. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you got to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, totally flexible, 100% suited to your schedule. You just fill out that brief questionnaire. You're going to get matched with a licensed therapist. Switch at any time. There's no additional charge. Want to make sure it works with you and for you. Find comfort this December with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. It's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, remind you that we also have the Nets newsletter going out every single day. One stop, ultimate for team and league coverage delivered right into your inbox, not only from yours truly talking about Brooklyn, but then also some high-level information around the league. You can go to LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com to start your day with a new Locked On Nets newsletter. Okay. So the Sunday game ends up also just being kind of more of the same. It's a closer game in terms of the score, but it's not a fun one to watch. You mentioned about at least the games they play hard, and they do, but that one was far less enjoyable. Even less enjoyable than Friday night. I don't know why. Just something about it was frustrating when you look across and you see Orlando in double-digit scores all across their starting rotation. They brought in some guys off the bench, but the interesting thing here coming out for Brooklyn, we'll talk about the injuries. I know you want to talk about Jordy. It's Cam Johnson, 36 minutes, and gives a big performance. Nobody else in the starting lineup. Dennis Schroder back in. He plays well. Also, the other three can't contribute. They go very deep into the bench in this game as Ben Simmons has a little bit of an injury flare-up as well for himself, too. And finally, it finally looked like well, you take it away with Jordi Fernandez, because it looks like Jordi Fernandez is reaching a point where it is about trying to continue to keep this team fired up on a game-to-game basis. And I think that's going to be a more and more difficult task as you go through stretches where you lose some games like this.
I think energy-wise on Sunday, they were fine. They did a lot of the things that they've been doing. Look, they're getting into ball handlers early. They're really trying to just make sure that you just can't get into the pick and roll stuff you want to get going. Like, they just are super feisty on defense. This game was very chippy. That was a gajillion fouls. There was 31 fouls by the Nets, 29 for the Magic. I mean, 60 fouls altogether is awful basketball to watch.
31 fouls for the Nets, 31 3-point attempts for the Nets. So they went 1 for 1 on fouls to 3-pointers.
Exactly. And then that was where I was going to say the next thing is because they took all the 3-pointers, but then also everyone missed them. So it was all the fouls in the world. And then you take all the 3-pointers and all the 3-pointers just clanking off the rim. And some were just like terrible misses because the Magic ended up going 7 for 28 from 3 for 25%. And then the Nets go 8 for 31 for basically 26%. And it's just an absolute total rock fight. So between the fouls and just the bricks, this wasn't the beautiful game by any stretch of the imagination. I do think real quick before Jordy, or just leading into Jordy, I think that still the encouraging thing, like I said, is the energy level stays up there for this team. I think we will see that most of the season. I think that just the nature of the players that they're playing on a nightly basis, the guys that are all kind of playing for a next contract or for a spot in the league, I don't think they're really at risk of ever just totally rolling over and dying this year, right? They just don't have, they're going to trade some of these guys. Everyone's still going to play hard. I think it's going to be a struggle, but I don't think the energy level will all die down, because I actually think what will happen is if your energy level dies down, they'll just play someone else. Right. Like, I think if they see someone's energy level, just kind of just drop off, I think Fernandez will just be like, someone else can play. So someone else can play that's going to do those things. We're not married to any of these guys. And then you look at Jordy. I mean, if it wasn't already like the one of us chant, or just the chosen one, so the Goga Batadze thing, I don't know if you saw what happened here, if you're listening, but Goga Batadze kind of hangs on the rim, and then he's talking trash, and as they're walking into the court for a timeout, and Fernandez says something to him, and Goga says something to him, basically sit down or just go back to the bench, and Fernandez has to be held back, and I'm like, oh yeah, baby, here we go. And just Jordi Fernandez going after a 7-footer, have Juwan Howard hold him back. I'm all for it, man. Just give us a little fire. If they're going to lose the games, if they're going to lose the games, but we have to have our coach be held back from another player, let's get it going. Let's do it every night. I'm all for this. And I think that it's just a good example of sort of the energy on a night-to-night basis that he's sort of espousing to the players. Is hey, I'm dialed up here too. I want to win these games. I don't want to take it from these guys. And we can play hard, and I can have the same fire as you, even from off the bench.
And he had to. There was in terms of, you get into a little bit with the refs about the call around Jalen Wilson and what he thought should have been a call. And the quote coming out of this game from Jordi Fernandez: "The game is judged by 3 people, and then we all have to go with it. There was a lot of frustration for myself and the players. We're going to keep fighting, whether it's against 5 or more." And I like the or more, because maybe
might get fined. You're gonna get fined for that one, probably. You really can't. He's gonna take a fine for that. Is I guess because it's couched in cryptic language, but it's really just not at all. It's basically saying it was 8 against 5 or something like that, and that's just not the NBA. is not a fan of of coaches just throwing the refs under the bus like that.
By the way, it's like I do like the idea of, because I'm sure that there is a scale that the NBA goes by when it's like, hey, I think the refs suck and they blew it for this one. That's gonna garner a different fine than, oh, 3 guys are making the calls and we got to go with it. Like there is a scale there, but also at a certain point, I think I always like it better when a coach just goes, yeah, I think we got hosed. I think the refs were real bad tonight and they blew a lot of calls that mattered a lot to us. But Jordi Fernandez is fired up, and as you mentioned, I think it's important to have that connection from the coach down to the players. And we've seen that all year. So it's not like it's any real surprise. I think that little moment there when he's willing to go maybe fight an NBA 7-footer, it's yeah, this is exactly why you see these guys never give up possession and always stay dialed in to these games, even if they're coming out on the losing end.
Although real quick, before you go to the next thing, I will say the fine, I'm actually maybe taking it back how much the fine is going to be, because Fred VanVleet on the court the other night basically went around to each ref, like on full display, and cursed each one of them out and called them each the B word, pointing at each one of them as he left. And he didn't get suspended and only got fined $50,000. So maybe there won't be. I was like, how did this guy not get suspended for this? It was like so insane. Good.
They call that the Players League. They call it the Players League. You know what I mean? Listen, it's a player-driven league, and so referees go ahead and just kind of stand there, real proud, pump out your chest, and take a couple of F or B bombs right into your face, which is just incredibly impressive on Fred VanVleet's part to be able to not only do it, but also probably come back and still play basketball. The other thing I was just going to mention here before we get into injuries, and there's been the trade market chatter is swirling around kind of in what the Nets expectations are, what they're willing to do. The one on Dorian Finney-Smith, which I'll forget who had mentioned it, was I thought comical in terms of some of the adjustments that the front office may be making. But I did just want to update, as is always the case. We talk about Tankathon. The Nets went from being outside the lottery to inside the lottery. They're now sitting there in the 11th position, just behind Sacramento and just ahead of Minnesota, which will be going over to Utah anyway, but 9-12. And this does remain the theme of the season. When they have those good games, and it's a lot of fun, and it's easy to root for, and I keep standing by, always cheer for the wins and be happy with them, because you're only a bad weekend away from being now 9-12. You're only another couple of games away from maybe saying, well, now we're 10-14 or now we're 10-15. And obviously with Chicago coming up, we'll see how it plays out. But we continue to have one eye on the Cooper flag, Ace Bailey. We got to work hard, quote unquote, to get ourselves back into that conversation, but at least in the lottery for the Brooklyn Nets coming up here in one moment. We had injuries coming out of the Monday game. And then, as I mentioned, trade chatter. What does Doug think about the lowered asking price potentially for one Dorian Finney-Smith? We'll do that to close things out ahead of Chicago come up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. No better time to get in on the action. NFL, NBA with the FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, we've been telling them about this forever, but you got new customers. You can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 real money bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is giving you everything you need to bet, place live bets on the NFL, on the NBA, all in one place. You go over to FanDuel right now. Brooklyn Nets at Chicago Bulls Monday night, coming on the back-to-back. Bulls -7.5 against our Nets. Bulls 8-13 on the season, -7.5 favorites. Bulls might not see a better line for themselves going into this year. Speaks to a little bit with what's happening here on the injury front with the Nets. Just some of what you're going to get when you go to our friends over at FanDuel. You're going to join. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 real money bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook of the NFL.
All right, so as we tie a bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, Brooklyn coming off back-to-back losses Friday night and Sunday against the Orlando Magic, back into the lottery, but also a little bit of frustration, and it's probably compounded by the fact that you get Dorian Finney-Smith, who with the ankle was already out for Sunday's game against the Magic, then Ziaire Williams. He left Sunday's game with an injury, apparent injury, didn't return, nothing official yet on him. You got Cam Johnson, appeared left and brush that off after the game, so he's trying to fight through that. Then you get Ben Simmons. He got ruled out for the remainder of Sunday's game against the Magic with a left knee contusion. So all of these things combined, by the way, with no Nicholas Claxton right now, no Noah Clowney right now, no Daron Sharp still this season. Once you start making that laundry list, you do start to look around and go, well, yeah, you're probably going to lose some games if all of these guys are going to be heading that way. And it doesn't solely seem like, at least from my perspective, that we're talking about a team that is trying to over manipulate, getting some guys off the court. We've said full strength, they're still going to have a hard time winning. Now it actually just looks like they're going to have a hard time fielding a team, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I don't even know if you mentioned Ziaire Williams. He's doubtful for this game too. Did you mention him?
Yeah, injury. Yes. Yeah. Already doubtful for tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, because he leaves the game early with the knee. He came up lame, and was just kind of wincing, and then he left the game early on Sunday too with possible knee injury. So yeah, we said this many times. Like the injury stuff is just real. Like you're not going to be pillars of health all season. Some of these other guys are, especially some like guys like Simmons, guys like even like Cam, DFS, they're just getting a little older too. Like it's just harder to play. It's harder to dial it up for game after game after game. And so I think they'll always take err on the side of caution. And it's not like these guys are just the healthiest dudes in the world anyway. So I'm just like not surprised that some of this would creep up a little bit. It happens for every team. Every team goes through injuries over the course of the season, many injuries. And so sometimes the key personnel, and sometimes you run a little lucky in terms of like how much guys are able to play. Those teams usually rise to the top over the course of a season. Like if you're just healthier and your best players can play every game, your record will be better. I mean, usually, right? Like that's just not some kind of hot take. So it stinks to see these guys injured. I do think they'll play it safe with just about everybody, but they are getting pretty thin now. Like if all these guys don't play, we could see like Dariq Whitehead's been on the bench every single game. He hasn't gotten into the game, but we could see these guys.
He played well in Long Island a little bit, so that's why he got himself back up here, which was a good sign. And now we may test the NBA waters again with him, right?
Yeah, I mean, if all these guys are out, like, if DFS can't play here and Cam Johnson, they're a little bit worried about it. And, Claxton might get suspended because of the flagrant fouls. Like, who knows? Like, speaking of suspension, like, who knows where he's going to be? They're just really getting pretty thin here in terms of who can play. And so I just think that's going to be more of what we see. We're just going to see some of these guys, if we get on the court, like we're just going to see some of these guys have to get on the court because they just are going to start running out of bodies at some point. And then whatever happens if they are trading these guys too. So again, you just can't expect full health from these dudes all season long. And when you know that their motivations aren't going to be to keep anyone on the court if they don't have to, then we're just going to see, I think we're just going to see more of a revolving door of dudes as things go. Right, like they have maybe with some of these guys in Long Island.
Yeah, we're not far off from the Killian Hayes conversation. I mean, come on, we all see it coming. It's just, we're moments away, I think, from getting the real why 17.5 over under, injuries, trades, and then look at what the roster looks like. And you said this going back to the offseason, so it is like the full credit to you. Not that I think other people would have called this out, but you said it from the day one. You look at this roster. It is the highest percentage of any team in the league of roster players that will potentially not be here next season, right? Like the turnover here is going to be so dramatic. It'll start with a trade deadline, and then it'll start with guys that are here this year and not going to be here next year because you're going to draft in so many more younger talents, and then it's going to be the new version of this Brooklyn Nets roster. That being said, the only one thing before we, I'm going to guess, I'll be curious to see which way you go with the spread there and the Chicago Bulls. The one thing is we're hearing a little bit more, and we'll talk about as the week goes on, the next couple of weeks, really, that the Nets are maybe a little more in trade sooner than later territory, talking about Dorian Finney-Smith, talking about Cameron Johnson. I found it very comical, and I can't give credit to who had this out there. The headline read something along the lines of, to paraphrase, Brooklyn Nets considering lowering the trade demand for multiple ones to maybe just one first-round pick. And I thought, I didn't realize that we were still in the 2 first-round pick territory for some of these guys. And everyone says Nets are still holding a high benchmark for how they're going to trade players, classic Sean Marks kind of territory here. The Cameron Johnson piece, that's different. He's having a career year for himself. The Dorian Finney-Smith veteran player who we know and love, I was blown away by the idea that they had adjusted down from something, but still we're going to be looking for a first-round pick. I find that really hard to wrap my head around in this NBA landscape.
Oh, that's because they're not going to get a first-round pick. Like it's
that must be what it is.
It's not to wrap your head around. There's no chance they're getting a first-round pick for him. Like we've said this so many times. There's just not 2 first. I mean, please. Like there's no chance. No chance. Maybe one if it's like from a team that's just gonna be drafting like 27th through 30th, maybe.
Right. Yep.
And even then, I'm not even positive because these rookie contracts are so important for these teams to have in a salary cap landscape that just really it's pretty draconian if you start pressing up against these bigger numbers. I probably would rather just take my bet on who I could draft 27, honestly. Like, and just,
Right.
and then rather than pay DFS what he's getting paid now, which is like in the 15 million range, and then he's going to pick up his player option for next year, like for sure. So when you hear it's laughable to hear 2 first-round picks completely. And I would say it's borderline laughable to think about a first-round pick. Would love to be wrong about this, by the way. Like, just like would absolutely love to be proven wrong for sure. But I just can't see what team is going out there and just shipping a first-round pick for him. Cam Johnson, that's a different story, right? He's having a great season. He's been able to really show a lot of different stuff. DFS, even with the good shooting means he's just tradable, like at all.
Yeah.
If the shooting had been bad, I would have called it maybe we're looking at him picking up the player option and being on the Nets. The fact that he's shooting well just means he has probably trade value. But first round pick, I find that to be a bridge way too far.
Oh, certainly. That being the case, though, Chicago coming up tonight. You mentioned 7.5 minus from Chicago going the Nets' way. Are you finally? You said the Nets, the spread, they're dominant against it. Are you finally going to go the other direction with all the injuries and say no, lay the points with Chicago?
You kind of have to, right? I mean, there's just too many injuries here. There's just so many. Like when you start thinking about who could be playing for the Nets in this game, I just don't know. Again, been wrong about everything here with this team. So I don't feel greatly confident. And I do know that what happens is the most recent thing that happened is often the thing that informs you the most. And it's overly weighted. So like they come off 2 losses and I'm like 7.5. How could they ever? Right. But there was a world where they just beat the Suns and you're thinking, who could they not beat? Right. So I get that. I get that these things kind of happen quickly.
Let's go. Bring it.
Exactly. So it's in between. It's more to me just like at some point these injuries, like if Ziaire doesn't, he's been really important for them defensively. If he doesn't play, Simmons just has like just has a guy who can like dribble. And then if Cam Johnson doesn't play, I mean, forget it. So I just think I just think they just have too many. They're just incurring too many losses for a mostly healthy Bulls team who have not been horrible this year. I mean, they're 8-13. Point differential is probably a little bit worse than that record, but they're around the same as the Nets this year with a slightly worse point differential. So I just think that I think I'd probably take the Bulls here with minus 7.5, but I'm also aware that the weekend might be factoring into that too much for me.
Listen, Tyrese Martin just went for 30 the other night, so I don't know what Dariq Whitehead's capable of if he all of a sudden is inserted into the starting lineup. Give me the points. The bottom's going to fall out here at some point, but why against Chicago? Not against Chicago, my friends. I'll take the Nets taking the points. We'll see how as they try to, again, maybe reset themselves in a positive direction, but also, as we always know in the background, are doing a lot of positive things when it comes to next year's draft.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated everyone rocking with us through the season. We got the Bulls on tap here tonight on the back-to-back. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Nets on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts.
My characters aren't losers. They're rebels. They win by their refusal to play by everyone else's rules. And that is Harold Ramis.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.